Welcome to episode 17 of the Discovery Files. Today we're interviewing Rick Streiff on kind of a continuing part of our series, where our first episode talking about the WKP discovery opened up a whole can of worms where found out that Rick also worked at Cove and at Midas. And so we're going to explore his experience at the Cove-McCoy deposit and some of the work that Echo Bay had done that was used down the road by subsequent companies. So, Rick, do you want to kind of kick us off on what your experience was like at
Sure,
Cove?
thanks. As I mentioned previously, I was transferred from Round Mountain up to McCoy Cove. At that time, they were driving declines under both pits and starting underground mining at Cove. So they brought me up because they discovered when I was at Round Mountain that I actually had a fair bit of underground experience. So they put me to work at Cove. I was the main geologist. They were driving the decline when I got there. What had just happened at Cove not too long before I got there was that Echo Bay had written off 1 million ounces in reserves because of downhole contamination.
Ouch.
And that's because they were using RC drilling. And there was a lot of water at Cove, a really high water table and a lot of water. And so the veins, the base metal veins at Cove, didn't have much much quartz or carbonates cementing the sulfides together. So they're pretty friable. So you'd hit that with an RC drill underwater and it just dribbled down the hole. And so another contributing factor to that is that corporate shoved a lot of drills at this new discovery. And of course, when you do a lot of drilling, you have to have a lot more geologists and you have to have a lot more techs to process the samples. And, it's the logistics just explode. Well, they didn't have enough. And at one point, they were over 100 holes behind in logging. So it took them a while to understand this downhole contamination issue, right? Because they were so far behind. And the drills were really running the geologists. The geologists weren't really running it. And so all of this contributed to this 1 million ounce write off. So when I got there, they had just written that off in the last year or so, something like that. And all throughout the time I was there for 5 years, every time we'd scrub the database and we'd get rid of everything we thought was contaminated. And then we'd mine some more and find out, oh, here's more contamination.
We often think that downhole contamination is easy to find. We have cyclicity plots and all these other things. And my experience has been the same is it's haunting how hard it is to find.
Well, and the big learning is if you see some cyclicity or some other indications, if you're seeing it in a few holes, chances are it's in a lot more, right?
Yeah.
So it's a big red flag. And we actually had a downhole contaminated hole at Round Mountain that was pretty spectacular. Echo Bay almost announced it, but it was 1,700 feet at a third of an ounce, 10 grams. The problem with that hole was the last 200 feet was a third of an ounce in barren granite.
Man. And then there's some of that, like, really coarse gold at Round Mountain occasionally, and so you drill through one of those nuggets, and it's just gonna continue rattling down hole
That's exactly
forever.
what happened. Yeah, the top intercept was over 100 ounces per ton. Yeah, and we just
Wow, wow.
drilled through a slab of gold and it dribbled all the way down to the bottom of the hole. So, we got the Cove and we had all this downhole contamination and it just plagued that deposit until the end, the downhole contamination. And one thing I've learned over the years, I got my dose of downhole contamination early at Round Mountain and then at Cove, so I'm very suspicious. But I find a lot of
Yeah.
geologists will, they're like bad analogy, but they're like alcoholics, right? It's like I don't have a problem. My holes, my holes are fine. Those other holes are
Yeah,
contaminated,
yeah.
but mine are fine. And then at some point it bites you, and then you become a believer.
It's so hard to protect against, right? Because, even if you have, like, a booster rig and all these other things, I've had the same experience early on in my career, and it was horrifying how hard it was to protect against, and really just kind of emphasized the importance of diamond drilling
Yeah,
to me.
yeah.
It's like at least twinning some holes to verify if those are really the real results or not, and it's so hard, and even if you're really diligent, it's I'm just always a skeptic.
Yeah, yeah, I am too, and I've seen it over and over at different deposits. But so when I got to Cove, they were driving the decline. You talk about water. Oh my gosh. We were pumping 5, 6,000 gallons a minute. They couldn't get the decline to the bottom of the high grade zone, so they came into it in the middle. And when we first got in there, they used split set rock bolts everywhere, which and every one of those split sets was shooting out a little jet of water about the size of my little finger. And
And this is with active
yeah,
dewatering
well,
going
it
on.
it really helped dewater the pit because we were under the pit. But, mapping geology, it's like you're standing there with your map board and trying to map geology, and it's like somebody's pouring a 5-gallon bucket slowly over your hard hat. That's what it was like.
And that's just miserable conditions too, and then it's hot, and then it's usually, like, there's a lot of, sulfides, so it smells bad. It's just like, "When can I be done with this
Yeah, no,
job?"
and I remember seeing a mucker in the decline face, and they had 6, those Flight 88, big pumps in the face, trying to pump the water out, and he had water up to the above his belt in the mucker.
Wow.
It was just an
Wow.
incredible amount of water.
That's just
Yeah, it
miserable.
was, and then, of course, another thing that would happen is because they couldn't get to the bottom, at some point, they instead of declining down, they went up, right? So there was a little low spot, and they turned that into the sump. Well, that was great right up to the point when the power went out, and then you'd see every miner in the mine run as fast as he can to get across that low point, and I can remember.
Oh, yeah, like, 'cause otherwise you're stuck there until power comes back on and hoping that there's still
Yeah,
air and
well, it
everything.
wasn't so much air, but I waded across that thing with water up on my chest before, to get out, because
Oh,
otherwise you'd be
jeez.
stuck in there for Lord knows how long, right?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
yeah, it was, interesting working conditions, but Cove was an odd beast. It had base metal sulfide veins that were subparallel to the stratigraphy, and it was in a clastic unit, fining downwards, conglomerates at the top, interbedded with sandstones and siltstones, and it got finer as you went down. And every one of these breaks and bedding had a little vein, anywhere from 1 to 6 centimeters, base metal vein, and you could really tell, the grade. You could eyeball the grade by how many veins were in the face. And it was heavy sulfide. It had probably 30 different varieties of sulfides and some really weird stuff, things like gersdorfidite, cassiterite, stannite, as well as copper, lead, zinc sulfides and stuff. A lot of people don't realize that Cove was a silver mine with base metal.
I actually didn't realize that until we interviewed, Jeff Nichols on it, and he was describing I think it was the biggest silver mine in Nevada for a few years
Yeah,
in the
it
late '90s.
produced, I don't know, what, 2.5 million ounces of gold, 160, 180 million ounces of silver. The doré
It's
bars
incredible.
looked like bars of silver.
Yeah, it's like a tiny, tiny bit of gold, and it's just like, yeah, it's a gold mine, but really
Yeah,
not.
and, we would see native silver underground, wire silver and
Wow.
stuff, so, yeah, it was an odd deposit, for me, it was a target-rich environment because I was responsible for the Cove Underground, so I was always looking to expand the underground, and so, we would find, contaminated drill holes and take them out of the database. Well, I would look at those holes because something contaminated that hole, right? There had to have been high grade
Yeah.
to have to dribble down. So I'd go look at the upper part of that contamination and then I'd look at it in context of the geology. And what I quickly discovered is a lot of these ore zones were trapped between faults, northeast trending faults that trended from the McCoy, which was a skarn, couple 3 kilometers to the 5 kilometers to the northeast to Cove. So the two deposits were linked by these structures, and the high grade would sit in blocks between these faults. It got to where it was almost like shooting fish in a barrel, going around looking at all these high grade. As a matter of fact, the last one of these pods, if you will, that I discovered. The mine manager at the time thought it was the most ridiculous thing in the world to be drilling in the pit because there's an ore body there. We know it's there. Why would you drill in the pit? Well, the pit wall sloped down, right? And so, I was drilling for a target that would have been in the pit wall. And so, but he literally banned the drill from the pit. Well, I did dewatering for a while at Cove. And so I
Mhm.
decided that we needed a monitor well at this location. So we mobilized the drill over there and I was coming with the
Accidentally drilled into a
yeah,
high-grade pod while
I
looking
was
at
walking up
dewatering.
to the drill with the chief geologist at the time, and I was telling him, I said, "I know there's an ore body down there." I said, and so we got to the rig, and I opened the chip tray, and I said, "And there it is." And you could see about 50 feet of the chips were almost solid sulfide.
Wow. It's kinda interesting because in hindsight, a lot of these projects where discoveries are made with water, water wells or dewatering holes or anything else, it's oftentimes this situation, right? Where the geologist really wanted to drill a target and they had no other way to do it, so they finagled, an agreement with the dewatering department or geotech team, and then the legend goes down that it was the geotechs that discovered this or the dewatering, people that discovered it. But it's often the geologist that had no other way to test the target.
Well, we called this zone the tower zone, and the reason we called it the tower zone is because they ended up mining it with the open pit. In order to do that, they had to move his brand new dispatch tower. So, but it was a target-rich environment. We expanded the underground quite a bit there. I also did some work over on the McCoy underground, which was a challenge as well as skarn. We were literally mining xenoliths in a dike, anywhere from basketball size up to 100,000 tons. Trying to predict those and connect them together was always an interesting exercise.
What a nightmare.
But in hindsight, when I look back at Cove, and at the time, a geologist, an Echo Bay geologist, drilled a few holes into the Helen zone and got some grade. It was
Was that
yes,
Tony Ing that did
it
that? I can't
was. Yep.
remember,
Yeah, it was
yeah.
Tony. And but at the time, we were busy with the McCoy and the Cove mine. It was perceived to be small and it would take quite a distance to get over to it. And so, he put in, I don't know, half a dozen holes. I don't remember exactly. Um, and, it's like, well, this is too small. It's not going to amount to anything. So that was sort of the
Yeah,
attitude.
yeah. Yeah, and it was a different time too, right? Because metals were still pretty depressed at that point. That was like 2000, I think, if I remember
Actually,
right?
it was the first half of the 1990s. Um, I left Cove
Okay,
in
yeah, yeah. So,
95, so it would have been before that.
okay, so it was a little bit better metal
Yeah.
prices then.
But yeah, again, high silver, low gold.
Yeah, yeah. And then you had, because it was in the late '80s that the Hunt brothers did where they cornered the
Yeah.
silver market, and I don't know, it's and that affected things for, like, a decade
Yeah,
after
it
that,
did.
right? So it's kind of a weird
Yeah.
time for silver.
But at the time, I didn't really, I never really looked at the core, and I talked to Tony some about it, but I never really grasped the idea that it looked very Carlin-esque because the Cove pit did not, right? Heavy base metal veins, high silver, clastic host rocks, just, it resembled nothing like a Carlin system. But, now
Yeah,
thinking back on it and having been elsewhere, including working on the Carlin trend, where I've seen some similar type relationships at Cove. At McCoy, the brown stock is clearly a porphyry intrusion. It's one intrusion. So there's probably a lot more at depth, right? And there's proximal
mhm,
skarn that goes right around the brown stock, some of which was mined. And then you had these northeast faults with a dike in it from the porphyry, and it was all proximal skarn, gold, copper gold skarn, which we were mining at McCoy. That was linked to Cove, and in hindsight, Cove was always people didn't quite know what to make of it, and there's a lot of kind of urban legend out there. At one point, we thought it might be akin to a Bolivian tin silver because of all the stannite and cassiterite and other trace minerals in it. But looking back on it, I think it was just a weird looking intermediate sulfidation. So you went from proximal
Yeah.
skarn out to a intermediate sulfidation, and now the Helen zone outboard of that, lo and behold, appears to be a Carlin. So I think we're seeing zoning around the brown stock.
This is one of the things that's always captured my interest in Nevada, actually almost anywhere, is it's almost like different deposit types are viewed as existing by themselves. And I've seen so many places where there's this change as you go, because like it's like big thermal gradient, big changes in fluid flow and fluid mixing and all this. And I kind of it's made me really be like, oh, there's a lot of gradational ore bodies that go from one thing to another thing to still another thing as they go further away, depending on what interactions they have with groundwater and everything else. It's really blurred the lines in my mind of how to better describe ore deposit models, like because I think a lot of the things you see in the literature are very maybe one-sided views of them, right?
Well, Carlin systems have always thought to be a unique style of deposit seen nowhere else around. But, for years, people have speculated that Barney's Canyon, which is Carlin like, is related to Bingham. And
Yeah,
I think at
yeah.
Cove, you see a pretty clear zoning around a potential porphyry. And,
Yeah.
as I said, I'll go off on my tangent here, but when I worked in the pits at Gold Quarry and the Carlin Trend, the Mike deposit has a lot of copper in it, copper and zinc,
Mhm.
and the copper's always thought to be exotic. But at some of the deep drilling where you were hitting skarn, copper skarn at Mike, you move over to Gold Quarry, classic huge, and Mike's a huge deposit, right? But it's connected to Gold Quarry by faulting again, and you go to Gold Quarry and
Mm.
it's a Carlin-like deposit. Well, as we got deeper into Gold Quarry in the pit, we started having recovery issues. So we didn't know what to make of it. So we sent the geos out, with a XRF machine, portable machine, to start zapping blast hole patterns. And we had entire benches coming out back over 5,000 ppm zinc. And
That's
people always
interesting.
talked about zinc here and there, and they notice it. And a lot of people talked about, well, they're these little base metal deposits, but they're of a different age, right? They're older, and
Yeah, that's what you always hear that, right? They're a different age thing, and then you never really
yeah,
see
and
age
they're
dates.
they're not related in any way. Well, the next step was we took some samples and sent them off for petrography, and what came back was we had pyrite, the classic pyrite with the arsenian-rich rim, and then rimming on top of that was sphalerite.
That's really
Yeah. So are we seeing zoning there similar to McCoy Cove where, Mike is more proximal to some sort of buried porphyry system and Gold Quarry is more distal? But as you go deeper, you're getting more arsenic, you're getting more base metals. So, you know
I find that aspect of things just fascinating, right? Because it has the chance to really alter the way we do exploration in Nevada. I mean, not we anymore, because like I'm not involved in it, but it's I don't know. I just find it really interesting because I remember mapping from McCoy and then over to Cove and then up towards the Helen zone, and you could exactly see that these are following the same structures and the cross-cutting relationships all supported that they're right around the same age, and it was really interesting to just think about, you know, is it a heat engine? What is the causes of it? And then how do you exploit that to do better exploration, to try and find some of these things?
To me, when you look at a Carlin system, you hold up a page of 32 element geochemistry and you hold up a page of low sulfidation epithermal geochemistry and you ask which one's a Carlin deposit, you can't tell. They look the same.
There's people that are probably catching on fire hearing that, but I've had a very similar, point of view where I actually had a friend ask me at one point, it's like, "Oh, I've got this geochemistry back, and it really, like, it really reminds me of what I was seeing in Carlin," and it's just like, "Well, what's the system like?" Describe the textures and things, and I was like, "Yeah, it sounded it sounded like just like what you said," and I was like, "Oh, That's pretty
So,
fascinating.
are these oddball epithermals that are just in an odd host rock, right? And they're zoned around porphyry systems just like they are elsewhere.
Yeah, it's a pretty fascinating thing to think about, and I remember, like, early in my career, I went to, like, a GSN talk. I think I was, like, still in school, like, maybe 2nd year of school, and I went to this GSN talk, and, someone stood up and they're like, "Oh, Carlin systems are purely structurally controlled, and anybody who thinks otherwise is an idiot." And then the next person stood up and did a talk on how they were purely stratigraphically controlled, and anybody who thought otherwise was an idiot. And I just was, like, thinking about going, "Well, aren't all of these things mixtures of very similar ingredients, and you're using the structures, deriving it from a heat source, where you digested metals from whatever your source rock was, and then I don't know. It's a really fascinating topic to dive into.
Well,
And it's like we talked about this a lot on the WKP discovery, where often the opportunities for us now exist in what everybody has said is dead or known to be not related to mineralization, and that's where our real opportunities for exploration are. And I view this as the exact same thing, just in terms of maybe more of a conceptual and chemical approach. Is maybe we're wrong on what we think Carlin
yeah,
systems
I
are.
think the jury's still out, and as you hinted, this discussion's probably pretty controversial with some people, and their hair's probably catching on fire right now, but, it's a good discussion to have. So, I
Yeah,
will
yeah.
tell you one more story from Cove. I have a whole little portfolio of lab horror stories, of assay lab horror stories, but at Cove, we had a in-house lab, and there was one geologist that was he was actually the hydrologist, but he was also responsible for doing all the condemnation drilling. So he would drill under all the facilities and the dumps and the, dewatering infrastructure and all that to make sure there wasn't an ore body before we, put something there. So he did that for, I don't know, 5 or 6 years, something like that. Then he decided he needed a monitor well in the middle of the pit, so he drilled a hole there and the assays came back nothing.
Huh.
And if you wanna see management panic, boy, the people freaked out. "How can this hole be completely dead? It's right in the middle of the pit. We know that we got 100 holes that says there's
Well,
ore down there."
someone didn't want condemnation drilling to find anything because that would make too
Well,
expensive
no, what it
changes.
was there was a gal in the lab who did all the data entry, and whenever she saw his name on the holes, then, well, he always drills dead holes, right? So why assay it? We'll just put zeros down.
Man.
Well, needless to say, she was fired. I always wondered, I wonder if there's an ore body under the dump out there.
Well, yeah, that raises questions, right? Because it's,
Eh,
like, and very rarely do you get to do, standards, blanks, dupes when you're doing condemnation holes with
Yeah.
an in-house lab. So it's very hard to detect if you're not getting a straight answer on those things, right? So that's
So,
bad.
yeah, goes back to my general saying about labs, trust but verify.
Yeah, I think that's my takeaway on almost everything, like geology, labs, like the things like contamination. It's a there's a lot of pitfalls out there, and I often tell people, like, the lessons on what not to do I've learned personally, and the lessons on what to do I've learned from others.
Yeah, I think that motto applies to me as well.
It's a hard thing, but no, do you have anything else to add on Cove?
Well, Cove was, that was a big inflection point in my career, like I say, it was target-rich environment with all these contaminated holes, I more or less discovered doubled the life of the underground, which was very satisfying. Again, working with some sometimes interesting but good people, and, it was a unique deposit that, I've not seen anything like it since. So, no, it was another good experience.
Yeah, yeah. I guess from all, kind of our series of interviews, what advice do you have for younger geos stepping into the world and trying to figure out this whole exploration game these
Yeah, I
days? Or
Yeah,
production too, for that matter.
we've touched on some of it is, networking and building and maintaining a network because it's a small industry. It's also reputation management, always doing a good job. Tell people think about the poor schmuck that follows you 5 years from now, and he's sifting through all this work that you've done, trying to figure out what in the heck did this guy do? That's part of reputation management. I've been the poor schmuck that's had to come along and try and figure out what the heck were these people thinking when they did this. So,
Yep.
documenting things that you did, and memos and basically doing good work. So when somebody picks up your log and looks at it and goes, "Oh, him, yeah, this is probably pretty good work." And then, there's a lot of technology involved now, AI starting to creep in. The talk is that AI will someday replace the geologists and stuff. Field skills are becoming quite rare. Good mappers are hard to find. Schools are canceling all their field camp and economic geology programs, and the field mapper will always be in high demand and doing good field work. So that is the basis that you can then take all the technology and lay over the top of it, right? And that's where you get your ideas. You're out and there's, I like to call it the aha outcrop. You get to an outcrop and you look at it and suddenly, I get it, I understand. Aha, you have that moment,
Yeah.
but you're only going to see that if you're out in the field. And another thing too is that you can fret and you can worry, if I got this hole placed in just the right place, or maybe I need to move it over here, or maybe, this is, I need to do another, soil sampling study to figure out, and sometimes you just got to drill a hole because what,
Yeah. Yeah. It's easy to just continue to want to get more and more data to help you not miss, and then it comes back with a couple more targets and indecisive this, and then you end up in the same exact position, but you've spent a lot more money and time, and you
yeah,
still haven't drilled a hole.
analysis, paralysis by analysis. But I know you've had this experience, right? You do all the homework. You say, this hole. I'm going to drill this, and this is what's going to happen. And you drill the hole, and it's like this looks nothing like what I thought it was going to look like. Right?
Yeah.
What the heck, right? But now you've drilled it and now you know that, right? You can take that information back and go, okay, so what did I learn from that hole? Well, maybe I need to do this
Yeah.
instead, right? But you'll never know that till you drill a
I
hole.
think that's yeah, and then documenting it, right? Like, so that way someone else, when they come back and look at your program, they know what you were targeting, and they know what you didn't find
Mhm.
and what you did find. It's really key because otherwise you just look at this field of drill holes and you have no idea why they drilled it or what they were looking for, and it's incredibly difficult to piece
Yeah.
together at that
And
point.
obviously, this whole discussion of discoveries is keep an open mind, don't get locked into a certain follow the data wherever it leads you, right? Don't get locked into an opinion or an interpretation because, you just have to follow the data and let it lead you where it will.
Hopefully, you enjoyed episode 17. On a suggestion from Raymond from Guinea, I went ahead and started adding back in these post interview clips. So, hopefully, you enjoyed this episode. This is the first time we've run into someone that was involved in multiple discoveries that we covered all at once. And hopefully, you enjoyed hearing his perspectives on different things. Huge thanks to Rick for all of the time that he gave me for these interviews. And I look forward to the next episode we do. And hopefully, you're enjoying the show. Please send us any feedback. The discovery files at hotmail.com if you'd like to send us feedback. Again, the discovery files at hotmail.com. Thanks so much.
Digging deep where the stories hide, through the hills and the mountains wide. Pickaxe swing and the earth unfolds, chasing dreams in the dirt and gold. Geology calling under our feet, secrets are buried in the rock and heat. With a heart full of wonder and a map in hand, exploring the treasures of this great land.